Hello. I want to talk about associations now. So this is moving a little bit ahead. I'm going to come back to the topic of forms and the RESTful stuff. I want to cover the associations now so that we be sure to have it before you're into the next homework. All right, so associations. As you know, we've got a database schema for our applications. If I can only spell schema. And it's composed of relationships connecting entities. Now, certainly, I suppose you could have some entities that are by themselves. We could certainly just have a single table. But in general, we think about most of our tables as having some sort of connection to other entities. That's where a lot of the power of our relational databases come from. Now, what I've shown you so far is, hey, we can build an active record model. So remember that active record is an ORM. So that's an object relational mapping. And we've already seen how to have a single model represent a single entity. So that wasn't too hard. Basically, we go and we say, yeah, let's generate a model. And I do absolutely encourage the use of the Rails generation for that. And then it produced for us a migration and as well as an empty model. And then we can go and we can start to work on the model and also fix up the migration as appropriate. So let's think about this. So we can do these simple model over a single table, but we want to have these relationships. So let's just start with a sort of an example of what we could envision that we really want to function as when we were doing database stuff. So let's go to the next step. Let's go from one entity to two entities. So let's say we have an entity authors. All right. And we give it a primary key of ID, auto-incrementing, our favorite thing in Rails. And we'll give each author a name. And then we're going to have some books. All right. And for our books, we'll also give them integer auto-incrementing ID, but they're going to have a title. Now, unlike the simple table that we've seen sometimes, where, okay, we're going to have a title and an author, let's actually have some form of relationship between the book and the authors so that we have a better design here. We'll take it one step at a time, though. So we're going to not get too fancy. We could set it up so that we have multiple authors, but I'm not going to. We're going to go with the following so that we have, for one book, we're going to have one author. Yes, this is a small incremental change from the previous design where we just stuck the author's name in there. Now, at least, though, the authors will be a separate entity, and we can easily query about authors because now an author, one author can go to many books, and we could change an author's name here, and it would we don't have to be updating in multiple places. We've removed redundancy in our system. So this is a much better design than what we've seen so far for the books. And this is a totally participating thing. So if you've got a book, we must, when we create the book, we must tell who the author is. So this author has to exist before we can put in the book. All right. So what would we like to do in an RM with this? All right. Well, what does it mean? What do we want to think about? So before we've seen, oh, okay, great. We can have a book model and we can make individual books and we can create them, save them to the database. We can find them, we can query and do that sort of stuff. But we're also going to have a model for authors in this one. Okay, great. But how are we going to tie them together? What could we envision that would work in sort of an, again, we know how to do that with SQL. Absolutely. We're masters of our SQL now in our relational databases. But now we want to work inside of Ruby with an object-oriented representation of our database. You go, I don't really want to do that. I want to just call and run SQL queries and get the results. There are a whole bunch of people who agree with you, okay? But learning an ORM is a great thing to learn, just from the standpoint of it's one of the ways lots of frameworks, lots of systems want to have you interact and talk with a database nowadays. And so it's one of those skill sets that's important to learn. So you're going to both, yeah, you could do your SQL, you know, you could run your scripts, or you could use, again, sort of a database library like the SQL library that we had to run a query and get back rows and then do things with the rows, or you can use an ORM. All right, so in the world of ORM, how would we like to do this? Well, we'd love to be able to do something along the line, along these lines. Let's say we're going to set Frank to be author that we create. And so when we create, we need to give the name. And let's give the string Frank Herbert. Okay. So this will go ahead and call the class method create on author. It'll generate a new author object. Okay. Store that in Frank. Because it was create, not only did it make it in memory, but it also went and did an insert statement into the author's table in the database. And now Frank happens to hold on to an object, and it has an ID, it has a name. It also knows that it exists in the database, that it's been persisted to the database. By the way, if we change Frank and save it and stuff, those changes, those updates would go back into the database. All right. So then let's say I want to add a new book to the system. All right. So I'm going to make a book. Let's call my book Dune. Okay. And so I call book.new. Now, book.new, again, is a class method on book. We know that new just calls the basic constructor of a class in Ruby. So this is going to generate for us a book object that then we will save in Dune, but we haven't done anything with the database. We haven't saved anything to the database or anything here. We just sort of have a blank object ready for us to put stuff in with whatever the default initialization is for a book. All right, so we can then take it and we could set its title to be Dune. Great. Again, all we've done is change the object in memory. We haven't done anything to the database yet. Then you could envision it would be really nice. Well, I said this is a totally participating thing. So before it gets saved to the database, I need to give the book its author. So in a object world, you know, the thing that feels good would be able to do something like this, to say Dune.author is equal to Frank, is assigned Frank. So we're going to take the Frank author object, which has been created and it's in the database, and we're going to assign it to the book here and their author attribute. Now, note, by the way, that there's no author attribute over here. So when we when we've made a book model, it doesn't have a author attribute by default. What we know is, though, that every book has, totally participating, one author. All right. So this is kind of what I'm saying is this is what we would love to see, is some sort of cool, slick system that allowed us just to do this. All right. And then, all right, we've built up our book now, and now we call save. And so please save that book into the database. That'd be great. All right. And so this then would do for us, you know, this would do an insert. As needed. And using frank.id as the author ID for the book. Okay, so I haven't said what our schema would be or anything, but this is what we would like to see. We'd like to be able to do this sort of thing so smoothly and plainly, without even having to think about how does this insert happen such that this works as we expect it to. This is what associations are all about. Likewise, here's some other code that we can imagine that would be neat to have, just to give you a taste of where we're headed here. I'd love to be able to do something along the lines as follows. Let's say, you know, we had, you know, Frank, which is an author. And then let's say, you know, so again, each author can have many books that they're associated with through that relationship. So wouldn't it be nice to be able to say frank.books.each do, you know, let's put it in a B, and then, yeah, sure, let's print out all of the titles that Frank Herbert has written in our database. To be able to write code like this, pretty neat. This basically here says, all right, I've got this guy. I know he's got this author idea and everything in the database. Now, I know there's a relationship over to the books, and we've somehow got this relationship set up so that we can basically, doing this here, this whole frank.books is going to be basically, all right, do a select star from authors and books such that the author ID is equal to Frank's ID for us, and let's get back those books, and we'll have a collection, a relation of them, and then we can go through them. And you didn't have to write any SQL to do that join. It was all taken care of for you. This is the power of setting up the associations for our models with this object relational mapping world. All right. So to put that in words, associations allow us to access from one model the other models connected to them via relationships. So the relationships exist in the database. Our models go on to the entities in the database. The associations are to be able to tell our models who they're basically connected to and how they're connected in our database. The system, this active record system, it can't look at a database schema and figure out, oh yeah, you have a many-to-many relationship. No problem, I'll just set this up for you. It basically, we're going to have to tell it that we have this relationship between this entity and this entity, you know, with our models and any other important data that we need, so that it can then form those queries for us on the back end and have us work just only in this object-oriented space. Okay, so let's review what our steps are going to be then for getting to this stage. So this is basically back to the steps for building a web app. You know, we always are going to start off, besides earlier steps are talking to the customer, figuring out the problem, what do they really need, making mock-up diagrams, understanding that space, all right, you know, understanding what it is that we're supposed to be building. Then, once we have an idea of what we're going to be trying to build, then we move on to how to implement that. So we work on our entity relationship diagram. We take that, we convert it to a schema. Then we go and we create models and migrations. All right, this is to make sure that we basically can now, when we run our migrations, we've built our database out via the migrations. Do not be trying to run SQL code to create tables, to modify tables, to do anything. Everything that you do, it needs to be living in these migrations, okay? To set up that database, it goes in the migrations. This allows you to have something, one, that's portable across different databases. It allows you to have something that's repeatable, it's all scriptable, and as well, it ends up, you're guaranteed that you're building the database out in a way that's compatible with the ORM, your active record, okay? So don't try to blend the worlds where, oh, I'm going to do a little SQL, create tables, and I'm going to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. We live only in the land of making tables with migrations. All right. And then 4, it's time to deal with associations, where basically this is all about adding code to models to generate methods that can use the relationships in your schema. All right, so we were talking about models and books and authors on the previous, I guess, I wanted to say slides, but this is a whiteboard, so they weren't slides. So, you know, for example, when we say we have, the example I gave you was frank.books. So where Frank is an author, Frank is this model author, a model of type author, and this books. This is what's interesting, is this is a method on the author model that is created by an association, definition, or declaration, whichever you want to say. So basically, we're going to go in and we're going to tell the author model about its association with the books model, and then it's going to generate for us code. It's pretty mind-boggling, by the way. And it's going to generate it, and we're never going to see where it is, where it lives. We can't edit it, we can't change it, but it's going to make the code for us. It's called metaprogramming, but anyway, it's going to generate the code for us, and we'll end up with a method called books that does all this stuff and knows about the relationship to the books table. All right, that's what this is all about. But the big thing is to know that we're gonna write a few words. We're only gonna write a tiny few words into each model, and a whole slew of methods are going to be automatically generated for us. It's a huge time savings, but we have to write the correct words, and we can't make mistakes in doing it, or we generate methods and things don't work the way we expect them to. And then we scratch our heads, and we can't even see these methods. We can't see the code. We can't go, oh, I see what's wrong with them. We have to really think it through and understand what we're doing and put in a few words into each model, and then voila, we are going to end up with a whole set of methods made for us automatically. The associations that are supported are as follows. There is a belongs to association. All right, so this is for when you are a one-to-one. So for example, a book maps to one author. We're going to end up saying that the book belongs to an author. I don't really like that terminology. I don't think the book belongs to the author. You could envision it could, but I would much prefer to have said the book references author or something along there to denote the foreign key relationship. All right. Nevertheless, belongs to is the terminology they've used, and it means, all right, I have a model where one of this model maps to one of another model. And so I will say, yes, my book belongs to author. All right. Then has one. Okay. And as well, has many. All right. So this is quite sensible. The has many. All right. This basically quite clearly means that you are from the entity going to the other entity, you will have many of the others. And so our author has many books. Okay. I'm going to, in a moment, pause the video and come back. I'm pretty certain has one is the situation of where you have 0 or 1. Okay. And this one is I always have it. So this is basically total participation. And this is probably not total participation. I'm going to look that up in a moment and then come back and clarify. But I want to continue on to note that there's also a has many, and we can give it an option, and we can say it's through, and we'll give another table. And so you can basically note that you have relationships that go through tables, which makes a lot of sense. We can have our relationship sets represented as a table. That table may have attributes on it. So we may very well want to be able to represent it as a model so that we can modify those attributes. But we still want to be able to do things via another model to get to another one. So again, we can do has many through. There is also a has one. So has one again can also take an option which is through. Okay, so whereas these we're not going through a named model. Okay, then there is the has and belongs to many. All right. Has and belongs to many. All right, I'm going to pause and come back with some clarifications. All right, I'm back again. All right, okay, so I've got this to help explain things a little bit better for the associations. I'm very likely to pause after this and prepare another whiteboard for you rather than draw it all out bit by bit. Let me walk you through this. And again, this is all written up in the Rails documentation for associations. You can go and look at example tables and figure it out. But let's just talk this through. I'm going to talk about the belongs to, the has many, and the has one at the moment for this type of scenarios. And then we'll look at some other scenarios. So I'm not showing the full entities for authors and books here. They're as they were on the previous whiteboard, where an author has an ID and a name, and books have an ID and a title. So this was the relationship that we were working with before. We had books totally participating in this relationship, and one book goes to one author. Here, one author goes to many books. We call this a one-to-many relationship, okay? And in this case, we go and we do this schema reduction because books is totally participating and one book goes to one author, and we'll go and put the foreign key author ID into the books table. All right. Now, but we do have many, an author goes to many books. All right. This is the one-to-many relationship. Now, when we have this scenario of sticking the foreign key in my table here, we do this when we have a situation of total participation. It's almost always this sort of setup. Oh yeah, I've got this total participation in a one-to-many relationship, so I'll hold on to the foreign key in my table. In that scenario, that's when we say a book belongs to an author. And note it is singular. When we work with associations, it's going to be really important to keep in mind, are we going to say that we have a relationship that's to a singular entity or to the plural entity? This is because, again, by convention, everything gets built out for us automatically with these methods. So when we've got this set up, books belongs to an author. Now, as I said, one author has many books. So we would end up working and creating an association that says an author model has many books, and it's completely fine, and it's going to figure it all out, and it's going to know that at the other side is a belongs to, and we're going to see it's going to know that the foreign key is living inside of the books entity. All right, because the associations will pay attention to what's happening on both sides here. Woo! This this is, again, whenever this is happening, this is because we did the schema reduction, because on the many side, the one to many, the books is the many side, it's participating totally, and so we've got this. And so belongs to is this little special circumstance there. It is possible that you could have entity relationship diagram here for a one-to-one, so we have arrows on each side, but books is also still totally participating, and so I believe we would end up making these sorts of tables again. It's just that now, we could. I actually don't know if I would want to do this for the schema diagram, but we could. From the association standpoint, yes, again, a book belongs to an author. It's the same thing, all right? But in this case, it's not that one author goes to many books. No, one author goes only to one book. And so when we set up the associations, we'll say an author has one book, okay? It's singular. In other words, we are saying that we're not going to go to multiple books. We'll only ever go to one book over there. When we actually set up the schema in the database, to enforce this notion, we would need to put a index with a unique constraint on the author ID column to make sure that absolutely only one book ever had one author ID, or alternatively, I suppose you could, if you were just doing database stuff, you would say the ID and author ID together form the primary key, but no, don't do that, because again, Rails wants its models to have this nice singular primary key ID. Great. So if we needed to enforce this, we would stick a unique index on author ID, so that to prevent us from ever violating the notion that we had an author assigned to more than one unique book. Now, that's probably not really the way I would set up my schemas. I would probably actually use a third table, but nevertheless, this is the scenario of when you've got the has one. Okay, so you've gone and it's been set up that this side is a belongs to and this side is a has one, and everything is going to work out just fine. All right, I'm going to create some new examples and come back in a moment. All right, and so another common association, as I noted previously, was to be able to do and the relationship is a many-to-many relationship. And so we could certainly have a situation like the following, where an author can have many books and a book can have many authors. And of course, a book, let's say we could have a book that we haven't assigned any authors yet to it, and we have an author that we haven't assigned any books to yet. This gives us lots of flexibility. So we'd end up with a schema like this. With this here being what in Rails we would call a join table. So we called it previously, this is the schema representing our relationship set here. But for Rails, they like to call it a join table. No model is made for this table, okay? So we'll have a model for author and a model for books. And what we end up doing is we end up saying that an author has and belongs to many. I didn't have space for this. An author has and belongs to many books, okay? And likewise, that we will say when we have our book class, a book likewise has and belongs to many authors. Okay, so we'll set up an association going both directions for the many-to-many relationship, and we'll create a join table. And then likewise, I mentioned earlier that there is this has many, and you can specify also an option for through. And this is when we want to set up a many-to-many relationship through a relationship table that actually has an attribute on it And so we'll actually want to be able to set that attribute. So we'll need a model on that as well. And so we would have an additional model. These sorts of things covered in a bit more detail in the next homework. You get to experiment and play with them. But the place where they're really covered in detail is in the documentation for the associations. And you have to read carefully and figure out. You mainly look for an example to match what it is that you want to set up. What I'm trying to convey here, though, is this big idea that these associations end up creating for us various methods. All right, so let's actually go back to the original situation that I wanted to talk about, which was we've got authors and they've got a relationship with total participation of the books. All right, so one book goes to one author goes to many books. All the books have an author. Okay, and so in that schema, again, we had authors, ID, and they have a name, and we have books, they have an ID, they have a title, and they have an author ID foreign key in them. All right, so in that setup, we're going to end up with a model for the book. So we're going to have something, we're going to have a class book, and this class, the model, inherits from application record. This sets it up for the active record. And then before, we've just basically, to date, have very simple. We've had nothing in our model class. Here, though, the way that we go and we put in the association, and again, a book belongs to one author. All we end up doing is basically writing belongs to. This is actually, we're making a method call here, but we don't use the parentheses. And then we go ahead and we give it the symbol author. And it will take this then, and it will automatically go ahead and say, all right, there must be a foreign key of author ID in the books table. So again, it knows, I'm the book class. So there must be an entity for me known as books in the database. And you're saying, I belong to author. So you must have in that table an author ID as the foreign key. All right. It's pretty wild. Like, it's all automatic. A huge mistake that is commonly made by students is to say belongs to authors. Why not? The table in the database says authors. Well, the problem is when they do that, then it says, you must have a foreign key down in your table, which is author's ID, but you do not. So, and then students wonder why things don't work. They don't get error messages the way you would expect. You would expect when you do this for it to go and tell you at the time that you did it or something, when you start Rails, I'm sorry, but you told me that there should be an author's ID key in the table, but I cannot find one. No. It doesn't tell you that. It waits for you to try to do something, and at runtime, eventually it just fails. And you scratch your head and you go, what in the world is going on? So you have to watch the singular and plurals really carefully in Rails and always be paying attention to, should I be using a singular here or a plural here? Because it all works by convention. And the moment so you don't get to configure it in the normal way, but the moment you violate the convention, everything falls apart. So you got to pay attention to the conventions quite a bit. All right, so when you do this, all right, what is actually getting made for you? What is actually happening? Well, this will cause the generation of a book author method. So this is what allows us, when we have a book, to call an author method on it to get back the author that we belong to, that we are set up, and that we'll always have to have, okay? Likewise, it creates a method for you called author equal. So you can do assignment of author, okay? It also goes and makes you a method create author. So again, remember when we do create of something, this is basically we're going to do a new and then a save. And the key thing here is we'll be able to create an author, and it will also be assigned automatically to us for the book that we have in hand, the book object. What also is going to, that also creates an exclamation point version of it. You're not going to want to be using exclamation point versions of things. These are to force stuff, override stuff. I'm not going to talk about exclamation methods other than if you see an exclamation method, you should say to yourself, ooh, that's probably dangerous. I better read, and I probably shouldn't just copy that from the web. I should understand why I would want to use an exclamation point method. In general, you never do. It's also going to make for you a method reload author. And so you might have a book object on hand, and you maybe know that you've done some things that might have changed the author actually in the database, or done something. Maybe you changed the author's name via some other methods, and now you want to be sure to refresh and pull in from the database. So this would make sure it pulls in the actual author information for you, get you a fresh author item. So let's just put this into an example here. So this is how we've got a model. We do this association. It generates for us a whole bunch of methods, and then we can actually use them. So, all right. So as an example, then we would go and we could say things again like book is equal to book.new. We could have book.create author. We specify the name, Mark. We could set our title, MSCI 245. I think I'm getting the feeling this is very similar to the other example I gave. All right. Anyways, but here you can actually go ahead and create the author. It'll be created for you, added to the database, and also then assigned to my book object. And at this point, this will go ahead and insert the book into the database. All right. At the moment, I'm not going to go further through all the other associations. I might add an additional video. You're going to get exposed to more about schemas and migrations, and also the associations in the homework number 7 that comes out. But yes, I may do a few more videos, but for now, this is it.